Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the committee meeting for tonight. Hopefully, folks on Zoom can hear us. Frank, can you hear us? Just wave if you can hear us, Frank. He's nodding yes. All right. So I'm hoping folks at home can see us. Okay. The purpose of this committee meeting is to get together and come up with some ways we can reduce that $785,000 deficit there that we have. So let's just dive right in and Dave, you want to give us a brief overview?
Okay, so up here, I believe that it's important to emphasize that this is a tentative budget. This is just a starting point. This is the foundation we're going to build the house on. So, nothing is set in stone. Myself and this group are going to do what we can to, ensure that we work on your behalf to keep any tax rate increase, to a minimum, if necessary at all. What I do think is important to point out is that this is an attempt to put together a structurally balanced budget. As far as I can see, I can't see a point in time where we have adopted a structurally balanced budget. So it's a budgetary concern of mine that I'm hopeful to rectify. We can't do it in 1 year, but I'm hopeful that through the over the 5-year period we can get to a point where we don't need to rely on resources that we've accumulated from prior years' operations. So,
could you explain what structurally balanced means?
Yep. The structurally balanced budget means that your revenues equal your expenditures. From what I can tell, it looks like we've included appropriations across all of our operating funds, somewhere to the extent of 15 to 20% for at least a 16-year period. So basically, it just means that there's a little extra fluff, within the budgets that have been adopted. And what we've done to keep the tax rate down is to, rely on resources that we've accumulated, prior years' operations, rather than go through it line by line, review of the appropriations that are included in the tentative, and make some difficult decisions to bring the budget in line with, where it actually, should be. Basically, appropriated fund balance is a one-shot revenue. It should be a one-shot revenue source. We've relied on approximately $1 million in appropriated fund balance for at least the last 16 years to fund each of our operating budgets. So that just goes to show that the budgets are a little fluffy, but I think we can work to ensure that they're more realistic going forward.
Can I describe in a little bit less comptroller?
Right into the microphone. Sure.
What? If you're in the private sector, those fund balances would be called retained earnings. So what that actually means is that the money that we've not spent on the taxpayers' money has gone into this retained earnings fund. And that's how we've been able to survive without increasing the budget, to reflect what truly is happening. So we want to make sure that we don't over fluff these budget lines so that we can honestly spend what we take in. That's just layman's terms, I guess. I wanted to, because I know a lot of people don't speak accountant and help
And if I may add some different thoughts just for perspective and consideration. So the Office of the State Comptroller in New York State provides lots of guidance and explanation as to budgeting and the process. And they also, the Office of the State Comptroller also provides lots of data. And just a couple of points I wanted to get out there in front of all of us. Looking at all the towns, big, small, rural, urban, all the towns across New York State, approximately 54% of town revenues come from real property taxes. In the town of Milton, I believe it's been closer to 35%. So just a contrast comparing the statewide numbers and our town. And also statewide, all towns, personnel services have been typically in the range of 29 or 30% of total appropriations. Again, here in the town of Milton, we tend to be in the upper 30% range, 35 to 48%. So we've got costs for our people, and I think everyone on this committee, and I think all town board members, have expressed desire to be sure that employees of the town are properly and adequately compensated. So I just wanted to throw those figures out for consideration. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
And I suggest also that we perhaps speed up, to the detriment of quality, this process so that our committee could be done by the end of next week. Because we're supposed to meet, what, next Tuesday? And then that would be after that and after that. And I just think it would be important so that this budget committee would be done with its touch of it prior to the end of next week. And that would allow the public to have a better feel for what the town may be proposing in a preliminary budget, rather than just what's out there on the street. Does that make sense there?
It does to me.
Does to me, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So we need to accelerate, so when we meet,
Just a thought, based on the conversations that we have, and I'll take the information, and the recommendations we provided the board, I agree to them, and update the tentative, so that it is close to the preliminary document. I think, from my standpoint, I'm going to need until maybe the latter part of next week to make those, amendments. Is that okay?
so that might mean that we meet again this week.
I
And then
would
I
say
don't know
we'll be
what the
open about.
schedule, I'm envisioning 3 more meetings,
Mhm.
including this one. Is that too many?
It's not enough, as far as I'm concerned.
It's a lot to go through, it is. But that's it. We best we can, right?
Right. Okay, where did we,
So did we make a decision we're going to have more meetings before next week?
Why don't we see how this goes before we,
let's see how far along we get tonight,
Maybe we can-
and then we can go from there.
No problem, thank you.
All right.
I think we stopped at central administration on page 4. And we were focusing on the dot 4s.
Go ahead.
This was an estimate prepared by our town clerk. She handles the ordering of paper and supplies for all town departments. Based on the information that she had available at the time that she put the estimates together, she feels that the line should be increased from 9,000 to 15,000. That number is something I feel comfortable with. But, maybe we can see where we stand at the end of September and see if there may be an opportunity to reduce that line. In the grand scheme of things, it's a
Was it
small
already over?
estimate.
Are we already over the
We
9?
were over in 2020.
Do you know where we're at right now? I thought. Get a quick look.
We had stopped at Central Garage, is that where we're at?
Central
Just above
administration.
it, but that's a good, that may be a good point to pick up. The only reason I say that, I think the operational plan, the parks and the community center are, it's one of our larger departments, and I think that it may be, in our interest and, the town case's interest to, more thoroughly, back those estimates. And maybe I can, do some research and find out what it is that we spend for each of these, locations for, internet, heat, electric, basically all of our utilities that, are buildings and ground, supervisor may not be, all that just aware of. And then to that point, this was a fluky, year in that some of those services, they shifted locations. So from an accounting standpoint, we accounted for the utilities, based on where they were provided, so. So this may be something I'll take a look at and see if we can, tighten.
So within that contractual line, that includes utilities?
Yes, it does.
So I guess, again, just a question really, there seems to be a lot of press about increasing costs for natural gas and probably for electricity. Are we building in assumed increases in these numbers we're seeing?
We've actually been contracted for both electric and natural gas. So the rates won't fluctuate, the usage may fluctuate based on the location of the service is provided. So this is where actually the benefits will look backward a few years. And outside of that, there's supplies to, for the upkeep of all of these buildings. Random, supplies that they need, to operate. They get, UniFirst provides, uniforms, mats, a service to swap out the, some bathroom supplies. So Central Garage, it's 1640.4. I've got a $3,000 estimate in the tentative. I think that is conservative, and that amount is to cover any cost for the trailer that we have set up for our highway department. What isn't included in that, or wasn't originally included in the estimate last year in this line, was the cost of septic, of septic service for the trailer, which actually is pretty steep. Again, it's a minor cost in the 2022 tentative. Information technology, we contract with an IT consultant. I'm more than impressed and satisfied with the service that he provides. And I think most of the employees that are elected officials would share that same sentiment. It does cost. We spend approximately a little over $1,000 a month for IT consulting services. This year may be a little higher. The reason that is because we've been setting us up in different work locations, breaking us down, and relocating certain departments. So I think 15 is a fairly reasonable estimate.
So there's no added cost to that? They're pretty much 15 grand, and we call them no matter what. Got
We
it.
basically,
He's an hourly number, right?
we had a contract with them. We first started to work with Accu Networks in 2011. We wound up working with them due to a dispute with a former IT consultant, and I don't think we've ever looked back. As far as I'm concerned, the services is pretty awesome. It's kind of one of those things. It's the cost of doing business, especially the size of the municipality that we are. Unallocated insurance, that's just insurance on our property, our vehicles, our equipment. That was actually broken apart by the pieces of equipment that each of the departments own. So 60,000 should cover us from an insurance standpoint within the general fund.
Those pieces of equipment, you have them detailed in here. Are we sure we still have all those pieces? Does anybody inventory those?
That's a great point. I mean, this number is subject to fluctuate up and down based on the addition or the deletion of the equivalent of vehicles. There isn't a lot of turnover from the equipment or vehicle standpoint.
And that'd be on the insurance bill. It's covered in what's not, it should be, line item.
It, for the annual it
Yeah.
is, and then it can, a vehicle can come off and they'll prorate the amount, or one will be added, or we'll just bear the cost of that addition.
Over years, actually. By the way, I know that this is a large book, but it's extremely helpful. I will tell you that. I appreciate your work on this.
It's,
It's been my Bible the
I
last 2 or 3
appreciate that.
days.
It's fairly
Yeah.
common in local governments and
Yeah.
especially in school districts to,
Right.
to go through and, substantiate all of the appropriations that are included in the budget. Basically, you want to be able to go to your tax base and show them that, that this number is supported by this contract or this agreement or this estimate.
This end of the table wants to know. A990,
Hey, what?
A990,
So that's a contingency item.
Yeah.
That is an estimate that I think the methodology behind that was to multiply the appropriations of the fund by 5% to derive that estimate, and then I may have just gone up or down to make it an even number. That is a number that we can certainly, pull out or reduce. It's included in there as a buffer for items that were unplanned.
Do we know for 2021, Dave, how much of that contingency amount has actually been used?
That's a good question. Benny asked that earlier. I would have to look to the financial reporting package for September, but you can't actually expend directly from the contingency line. The board needs to authorize a budgetary transfer to push it to another appropriation. We did, just from a context standpoint, we did utilize the majority of the contingency that was included in our 2021 budget.
so we just wipe that out.
We did? We will?
So after the conversation of having a padded budget, and it's not in like one certain spot or, in personal services or equipment capital outlay or contractual items or, employee benefits or, it's these estimates that may be, a hair inflated. They're spread, throughout appropriations, amongst the budget. This is certainly a line that we can, work to reduce, and I mean, that's a dollar for dollar saving from, tax levy increase.
So I did 45,000.
I'd like to see it.
I can make that change if, you know, we
You
can.
picked
That's
this
fine, we
number
can
by
do that.
what, 5%, and you did a percentage somewhere of,
It's an appropriation, something, yeah.
okay,
So what is it now?
on the top.
Well, you said it's 5% of our total appropriations.
Oh, I
That's
see, okay.
115.
Okay?
That's
So
all.
keep it or get rid of it?
I guess we're planning to reduce
Okay.
it.
What is it?
40 sounds appropriate at 45.
Sounds good.
45, and that's what it was, you know, in the past, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
We didn't even have one in 2020, right? Is that because we boosted it up?
We used it, that's
I see,
why.
okay.
I think it was in the range of 75.
Okay.
So that's minus 70,000.
Yep.
The 1920 Municipal Association dues contractual, that was, historically, we've accounted, and I guess actually the budget that they accounted for municipal association dues, like within the departments. I think it's more transparent and clean to you know, the budget and account for those expenses within, you know, one singular line within the fund for like a, it allows you to trend out the cost of those dues, you know, as time, you know, lapses. Yeah, and just for us to be a part of the Association of Towns, you know, the cost of that is $1,200. And, you know, that eats a bulk of that 5,000, and that's we actually we have to pay that, that amounts to be a part of the Association of Towns.
And every department has, you know, associations that they belong to, so that's where that line will cover all that instead of figuring out where it came from.
Our building inspector put together the emergency preparedness line and requested 10,000 for equipment capital outlay and 10,000 for contractual items.
Now, when I read that, he requested that
Yeah.
because of COVID and things that's bringing that up now. But if I read it right, didn't he want to start a kind of contingency line to be prepared? Did it have to be all 10,000 this year, or can we split that up to be over the next 4 years, $2,500 a year or something of that nature?
I think his original intent was to create a reserve account for the accumulation of resources that we use in, you know, in the event that the big emergency happens. From a review of the reserve funds manual, I don't believe that the general municipal law allows for that type of reserve to be established. We can certainly check with Jim to see what his thoughts are regarding that, but
So that would go to a different place, right? It wouldn't necessarily go in the operating budget. Well, it would, but it would be on a line like we did with the
Exactly.
heavy equipment and that sort of thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sharon, if I may, I think Bill actually had laid out in a letter that he presented to us a request for $25,000.
You did? Oh,
I think in talking, and I don't think you were with us
No, I wasn't.
when he sat with
No.
us. In talking with him, I think he expressed the understanding that that was a big ask,
Yeah,
but really was hopeful that something could be done. And I think that's how we got to the 10,000,
okay.
for whatever that's worth.
What I would propose is that maybe the 10,000 that we, you know, include in an equipment capital outlay standpoint, maybe we do recommend to the board that they establish a reserve so that we, you know, we can utilize it to maybe replace the fleet of vehicles that the building department currently possesses. You know, it's a good practice to put away, a small, an incremental amount of resources on an annual basis with the expectation that in year 5 that you'll have accumulated the resources necessary to buy the vehicle or the piece of equipment that you're trying to acquire. So maybe we table that and think on that one.
We can bring that up to the board.
That would act, the board would be the body that would need to, by resolution, establish the capital reserve.
In an attempt to get a balanced structured budget, we seem to be adding these reserves all over, right? And this,
Yeah.
we want to have a blanket, although we don't look at particular departments, and we do it. Are we gonna say that we're gonna take what they wanted and it's a quarter, or we're gonna take a half to increase the tax burden this year, or is there any thoughts on that?
So this is a tough year to fund reserves, based on the condition that we find ourselves in, but this is where capital planning, is one of the most important functions that a municipality can do. It's beyond, you can't even stress how important it is to evaluate your infrastructure, your equipment, and your vehicles, and plan to replace them as necessary. It's certainly, it's not something that needs to be funded this year, but if we can certainly, write down that this conversation was had and that, plan, that we, maybe we do plan to evaluate the benefit that a reserve for capital vehicle replacement could provide, in 22.
Wouldn't be, well, we could start,
Yes.
Exactly.
so 2,500.
All right. That's to start.
So you'll change, it won't be on this line, right? It'll be on a different line all by
It
itself.
it actually
Where do you put it?
goes right into the summary of appropriations and revenues,
Yeah.
and it's technically called the budgetary provision for other uses.
Yeah, okay.
I took the liberty to add 100,000 on top of the highway department's request for appropriations, because I recognize the value in funding their equipment and vehicle replacement reserve, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for a first start. That fund in particular, that would increase the provisions or the appropriations and budgetary provisions for other uses of the BE fund, general town outside village, by 2,500.
What page was that on?
On page 2.
So you remove something on page 2?
We'll go into that,
You basically increase the 673 to
great, 673.
679, 680.
See,
Line P.
Ah,
Okay.
what is it now?
We're going to add 2,500 to that line
and reduce this by,
and reduce this one
Okay.
by
that takes the
It
10.
actually, it would be reduced to about, it actually would be reduced to 0.
Right.
The 2,500 from an appropriation standpoint would fall to the bottom of the fund. under interfund transfers.
Here, okay.
So there's zero there, just one.
80K, right? So far.
70 and 10, yes, 82. Better ways. So 99,019 is going to go up by 2,500?
Yeah. This is unique and it's, and some, I guess, generally it does present challenges for local governments in funding reserves. As far as like, there isn't actually no appropriation that exists to fund a reserve, but from a transparency standpoint, I think that, an account under the interfund transfer section, or the .9s would be, would afford the public with the most cognizance of what it is that we're, trying to accomplish.
The next one would be animal control, and that's going to have to be a town board decision. So that number is going to be up in the air for a little while.
And what Benny's referring to is the personnel service line, the .1, and that relates directly to how the board plans to staff the department. Historically, we had a full-time animal control officer, and we went with another full-time animal control officer. Against our appropriations and reduced the tax levy to stay within the realm of tax levy compliance.
Okay, something that's also not on the 22 tentative budget is A 2660, sale of real property. The plan
Yep.
is to sell 2 acres of land to the emergency corps for a price yet to be determined. That will, I realize it's a one-time source of income, but that will also eat into that 785 number on the front page.
And what number was that again, Ben? What appropriation?
It's revenue on page 8,
Got it.
A 2660.
Yes.
This was an item that I did not consider, and I apologize for that. Whatever the amount is that we can increase from or that we can receive, in revenue as a direct reduction of the tax levy. What I would recommend is that, the board work with the agency to determine what it is that, we plan to, sell that property at, and, to get contracts put together that can support that revenue item.
Could that be done fast enough to put in a budget for this year? Simply ask.
For 2022?
Yeah. Because you gotta pass it by
November 20th.
I mean, it's a source of revenue, but I just simply ask whether you could include it in this year's
In 21's fiscal year?
22, the one we're working.
That's what we're planning to do.
We can sell it fast enough to put it in the budget.
We don't necessarily need to sell it. What's important is that we have an agreement or a plan with them to sell, and then it can be executed by each party.
It shouldn't take 14 months to close the deal with the ambulance corps.
Well, hopefully. It does take a long time to close that Whitehaven one. Wait a minute.
Don't go there.
So that'd be 100,000 plus 200,000.
Well, it should be 200, right?
Yeah, right, he's talking about,
Yeah.
he's lighting up the tote board here.
Oh, all
We
right,
already had
okay.
100, he's adding
So we're
200.
at maybe 300.
We're at
Okay.
300,
All
yes.
right, okay.
Just another revenue item for consideration is the state aid for court facilities. So there's a program called the Justice Court Assistance Program, and they'll provide up to 30,000 in any given year to a local government that has a justice court that utilizes, or plans to utilize resources to make capital improvements within their court. So part of that furniture quote included, basically the whole furniture quote that, or capital amount that was included within the justice court line.
Yeah.
I guess it's the 23,758, that would be totally offset by the receipt of the grant funding through
And
the
that's not
state.
in here? The
It is.
30,000?
I'm not sure why it wasn't a one-to-one, but it's fairly close. I guess I probably, I'm fairly conservative, or I try to be as conservative as possible, so that's why I would have included an estimate of 20,000, rather than for the full 23,000 that would be estimated for updated equipment and furniture within the justice court. So that's actually that's a zero
Yep.
tax impact. What they spend, the state reimburses us.
And it's not really furniture, it's filing, it's a filing
Filing
system.
Filing system, furniture, chairs for the public.
Is it? Okay.
No, the chairs are coming off. The judges said they don't,
We could take them off. I mean, that's,
yeah, we're gonna take the chairs off. They don't,
Okay.
they purchased chairs a year or two ago, and
oh,
they're okay with those, so
okay.
that part will come out.
May I ask a question, page 8, revenue,
Yep.
A 1120, 650, 431. You've got a tentative of only 55,000, or up by hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue.
That's our retained earnings.
That's,
Non-property tax distribution by county. Why would that drop by
So
300,000?
sales tax in a whole across the three funds that for which we allocate this sales tax to, the reality is probably increasing. However, we have to finance the part-town funds before we can apply any sales tax revenue to our general townwide or DA or highway townwide funds. So those are the funds that encompass the village, but the village is elected to receive sales tax distributions from the county, so we utilize the resources provided from the county to fund the operating budgets for all of the area, around Austin Spa before and we have to reduce the tax levy to zero before we can use those resources to offset the cost of, or utilize them as a revenue source within the A or the DA fund.
So how do you lose $300,000?
So if you go back to the page 2,
Is it just in a different spot?
it's under non-property tax distributions by county in the third. I project that we'll receive 3,500 in total, which is a projection that was 400,000 in excess of the projection that we utilized last year. The majority of those resources is tentatively going to utilize to fund the TV operation. And then the general town outside village operation. I did utilize 95,000, of sales tax resources to, plan to, give back to the community. We have it's called the Parkland Development Fund. And it's like the resources that are within that fund are accumulated through the sale of developmental property. Whereas if they can't build out any recreational area for the space, they provide the town with a few thousand per apartment or parcel or whatever it may be. So we actually have a fair amount of resources there, and we can utilize those resources for, to be able to
We can use that money to upgrade the
parks.
the conditions of the parks.
So we could, the money that Anthony, is it Anthony,
Mhm.
wanted, we could
Do
use
away
that 95, some of that
with it
95,000.
entirely.
Not for the leaf picker or anything, but for, oh, that
Pay
too?
for that too, yes.
Oh. Okay.
For any of the stuff related directly to the park, we can, do away with, any projection that we may have had and utilize this fund to
To cover those costs.
That 95,000, it's certainly an item that, we can certainly pull out. Again, this is just a way to, ensure stability, and fiscal health within the fund. If you plan to expend from the fund, you want to also, ensure that you're, you're directing resources into the fund so that you can continue to make improvements within the parks.
And cover splash.
Won't cover a splash pad, no.
But-
Yeah.
We have resources, I think somewhere in the range of 265,000. And this 95,000 that would, maybe directed into that fund would,
So if I look at the fund balances that we had in, well, you had in July, I think you did in September too. Did you do that in September? Financial package? Did you send out? Got it, do it. I just didn't read this. Yeah, we-
reconcile bank accounts.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's the CI 207.
So, see,
They can't use the open space fund.
There.
Can't use the open space fund to buy a lawnmower for Anthony. Right. I know. That's why I was laughing. Yeah.
265, 493 in that fund.
Okay.
And you've pulled out 95 of it and put it here, is that what you've done?
I've taken revenue from sales tax distributions to increase that figure up to 365, and then
Okay,
plan to spend 130, kind of keep us where we are.
okay.
But this is an item that we can certainly
So we could
Cut it
not
off.
fund that this year, take 95 off of it and still,
cut the size of the fund in half and still complete a project. Whatever we,
A nice project.
Yeah.
well, we've had requests for pickleball courts, the tennis courts need to be replaced, the basketball courts are a mess. That's something we can use this money for this year.
Well, it's been sitting there for a while. How long?
It's been sitting there for years, but no,
Yeah.
no direction for how to use it.
Yeah, we're all,
Did we get a minus something out of that conversation?
100,000?
minus 95, Jim.
Minus 95, so it's 95.
Yep.
It's dedicated open space fund.
Hmm?
It's a dedicated open space
On
fund.
page 8.
That's all right.
She said he's having a big enough money to talk about. We would probably do that, these, isn't that already this, less this, and this? No, they're balanced. Okay.
Page 8 again, Jim, you said?
Okay.
Dave, question. On the revenue side, we lost $380-something thousand on that non-property tax distribution by county. In the past, as you know, we solved for real property taxes. Okay, but you now move that out of the revenue side to be the general outside village. That directly affects the tax rate and how much we're going to do, because you've taken it out of the A-line revenue and put it in the B-line revenue. Is that correct? But that's, so we're short. Correct me when I'm wrong. Because you're solving for, we're 299, 950. The 1.5 million. You're missing a number. You brought it down to 398.
The 299.5
Yes.
goes down to the left and covers the 300,000 from the fuel allowances. It's just coming out of, because of where it's,
All I'm saying is
reserve
that
account that it's in.
you solve for balance to be raised by real property tax, which currently in the tentative budget is 1.5 million. You used to include 400,000 from non-property tax distribution by county. That would have lowered that balance to be raised by property tax by that amount, which it's been moved to line B. Am I talking wrong?
So, following the points you're making, we have to finance, we have to use all of our sales tax distributions to finance the DB and.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
So,
We just don't have enough like we have in the past.
right, but we just freed up 95,000.
Okay.
And then, if we were to reduce appropriations in the DA, or I'm sorry, the B or the DB, then again, it's a reduction to the real property tax levy.
Does the fact that we have received over $400,000 more in sales tax this year than last year make any difference in anything? I mean, it makes a difference in the bottom line, right, when it all falls out,
Yeah.
and that money will go to the funds, right? You don't spend it,
Yeah. So I guess,
everything else gravy, maybe.
it's great, I mean, to be honest with you, but this kind of goes back to maybe a budgetary ish, I don't know how we want to categorize it, but a practice of a historical practice, whereas we would appropriate about $1 million every year. So you say you have $1 million in the bank account, you appropriate $900,000 as a financing source for next year, and then you have a $900,000 surplus, and at the end of the day, or at the end of your current year, you're back to where you started.
Okay.
So we have,
We're up here right now, say it again.
so you have $1 million.
Right,
You appropriate, so that's where this should be zero.
okay,
But you're using these resources
Yeah.
to reduce your tax levy. So you have $1 million, you decide to use $900,000. You're really cutting it close. You may only have $100,000 in the bank, at any given point, next year. But, and this is where if you were to actually have an operating surplus, you could actually go negative, and that would be, very detrimental to the tax base. And you'd have to issue debt, basically debt to finance your operations, which is really one of the worst things that, a municipal government can do. But fortunately, this year we're going to recognize an operating surplus. So So that 900,000 now, we put it back into our account and we basically wash.
Dave, I don't know if you can answer this off the top of your head. The sales tax receipts, the non-property tax distributions by the county to the town. The town budgeted a number for 2021. If the actual receipts exceed the budgeted amount, and per fund, let's say, each fund the total receipts received exceed the total budgeted amount, how does the excess compared to budget get allocated or directed?
Well, if we adopted structurally balanced budgets historically, then you're right. I mean, we would be recognizing surpluses, you know, and then we would be trying to figure out like, well, now we have all this extra money. What are we going to do with it? Like, you know, we would be planning for you know, how to use those resources, but since we appropriate so much as a financing source, you know, when our budgets are just padded, you know, just enough, we've really found the happy.
Right, no, I think I understand that, so let me pose it a little different way. You know, what if sales tax receipts that the county has and distributes, just because of circumstances far exceed what anyone ever thought possible? So, you know, I'm not saying it's a matter of poor budget planning process on the part of the town, but rather events lead to this surplus of sales tax receipts. I mean, the town gets its share of whatever the county receives, right? Whether that comes to 100% of the budgeted amount or 150% of the budgeted amount, the town gets its appropriate share.
Or 50%.
Or 50%.
Yeah.
Right. So again, I guess what I can't put together myself is if there's $100,000 of excess, my excess sales tax receipts for the year, how does that get directed? Where does it go?
It just goes to fund balance or retained earnings in the private sector. So it's basically your revenues they exceed where you.
Right, so, I mean, is that excess, in my example, $100,000 split up between each of the funds that had received something from sales tax during the year? Or does it all go to the A fund, or does it all go to DB? That's where I'm unclear.
The way I allocate is based on the budget, which I think is the most equitable basis.
Okay, and I mean, that's reasonable in my view. I just wasn't able to figure it out.
If you guys were to see the financial reporting package for any given month, you can see how the sales tax distributions are allocated to the funds, and so say we have a $400,000. We recognize $400,000 more in sales tax receipts. 250 is going to go into the DB, and it's going to close the fund balance in the DB. 50,000 is going to go to B, and that's where it will reside in the same respect to A. It's the last page that's included in that report.
$476,000 over last year, but I don't know where we're at in the budget. Are we on par with the budget?
We're gonna exceed what we estimated.
Are we going to keep all of that?
Oh yeah, I mean it goes, and it's going to be accounted for in the same respect. So all of the funds will benefit from the influx of sales tax receipts.
Is that related in the 74% or 12 or 14%?
Exactly.
So you're suggesting the correct, whatever, budget process, we would not run surpluses and not have overages. We would spend all of our reserves down to some number, and that would obviously lessen the tax burden. But then you're in a position that you would have fund each successive year at the exact tax rate to really run the town without overages, without surpluses, without padding.
Right.
I think padding is important on both the revenue side and the expenditure side to a certain extent, but when you get to, when it gets to be too much, that's when,
And then-
and then you gotta work your way out of it through, through successive budgets, and it's not a one-year plan, it's, it takes time to find basically the sweet spot of.
Should we be doing it this time around? Do we have enough funds? And that's for the board to decide.
Cover the shortfalls?
I mean, in reality, we could reduce the tax levy to zero, but is that what's in the best interest of the tax base? If you rely on those resources, they're gonna be depleted, at which point, then you're gonna have a significant taxpayer increase.
The next
And
year.
that's what we want to avoid. I mean, you can see it where we, the tax rate supplement, there's a chart that depicts 20 years of the tax rate and how it's been. I think it should be in there at some point where we basically
This one, yeah. this one.
drive the tax rate down from $2
Really
to
want to have it be a flat
basically it should be flat or basically trend upwards. We depress the tax rate significantly, and there's points of inflection where you can see like, oh, we recognize that maybe we were in that shape because of budgetary practices, and at that point we
This isn't working so
had
well.
to significantly increase the tax rate.
It should be more of a steady.
Simple, yeah.
Are we gonna try to do that this year? Is it possible?
It's,
Or at least take a
that's
stab at it?
with the comptroller, I would always recommend a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
You don't wanna do anything too drastic, right? And, you utilize too many of those resources they have, at which point then, something unforeseen comes up and well, we're actually in poor fiscal health. We wanna be, we wanna maintain the health of our funds. And continue to provide services at the level that we've historically provided them at in a fiscally responsible manner.
Dave, I think a year ago, you provided us with information, I think, from Office of State Comptroller about recommendations on the range of the fund balance relative to appropriations from that fund. And I think I have it somewhere, but I couldn't find it in my notes.
That'll be available in very short order.
Okay, great.
And the only reason we're going through the audit process now, and I want for you guys to be able to have audited financial information. It's important, and hopefully on a forward-going basis, we'll never have this issue where the financial information isn't included on a timely basis.
I can tell you, Mike, that when we go to Association of Towns training and we sit in on a budget class, one of the questions that everybody seems to ask is how much is too much? And the people running the class say, we don't know, but we'll know it when we look at your books. So there is no definitive, you should have 10% of your budget in the bank, you should have 20%. It all depends on how you spend your money and where it's allocated. And for the years that I've been going to the Association of Towns, that's pretty much their standard answer. We don't know how much is too much until we see what you have.
And the only caveat there is that if the local governing unit decided to adopt a fund balance policy and set a threshold or criteria for us to audit against, then we would utilize that as criteria for you guys are doing a good job, or we can tweak this or that.
So we at a total of 395,
We're at 395, yes.
and that included A, is that right?
Yes.
So that starts with the contingency line for special items under government, general government support. The 30,000, is that again the 5% of
5%
the
appropriations.
appropriations?
So
We'll cut it in half or something,
it was 7650 last year.
7650 last
Why
year.
don't we just take it down to 10,
And,
So,
yeah,
right? These are all recommendations to the board.
yep.
Another 20.
Yes, Jerry Lewis.
What'd you call it?
Jerry Lewis.
Oh,
Nobody under 50 is going to know what I'm talking about, so. That's it. Safety inspection is,
is that furniture?
the safety inspection is the building
that's the
department.
building department, and that's probably just a, pretty close to a 2% increase there. Yeah. But the equipment and capital outlay probably includes furniture in there.
So the only thing I want to draw attention to is that within the tentative, there's been consensus amongst some of the board that the part-time employees should be paid the full-time rate of pay. So because of that, our deputy building, one of our deputy building inspector, we actually have two of them. One's a full-time employee and the other is a part-time employee. If we were to reset his pay rate from 1568, it would be at 2765. Using the employee salary scale that we have available to us. And then the other then there's two other people that are impacted by this. There's a clerk within the building department, and the rate of pay for that employee, if she were to be compensated on a full-time basis is the same position, she would go from $15.53 to $19.30 an hour. And then we have a code enforcement officer, and again, his rate of pay would go from $15.50 to $22.82. These are going to be items for consideration by the board, and I think of great benefit to, maybe even to these employees that the board is recognizing the pay rate inequities and has included appropriations within the general fund budget to evaluate the positions and reset the rate of pay for these employees. But,
And that's why that number is more than 2%.
Yep.
The general consensus, like Dave was saying, is that, we've struggled for a year and a half to find some way to get equal, to bring our part-time employees up to more than you want fries with that type of position. They go through training and they have major responsibilities. When they're signing off on something, they're signing off as a town employee and then they're, taking responsibility for the town. So I think we all on the board agree they should be paid more than, 15 or $15.35 an hour. And the board will have to determine somewhere in the middle or, where they want to end up. But that's why that number's not 2%. I noticed you were talking about that. It's a little bigger than 2%, but that includes, like Dave was saying, right now, a couple individuals are making under $16 an hour. If we go through with the plan that we have, they're going to be over $20 to $23 an hour, even more maybe, depending on what position they have. So that's something we have to consider. On the bright side, or plus side is that they're part-time employees, they don't get vacation time, they don't get sick time, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
It's 9, right? And buildings. Oh, he's this?
Sure, you gotta use your microphone, people can't hear you.
I wasn't talking.
I know, when you do, when you do.
Down to an agreement with the neighboring locality to provide the service on a contractual basis, to the hiring of a part-time employee, and we're trying to figure out what the sweet spot is from a staffing standpoint.
The animal shelter is the annual number that we give as a town. Public health, I believe, is our public health officer. Street administration.
That's just a raise.
Yep.
Street administration, just for context, those personal services, they're actually used, to pay for, to compensate the highway superintendent, stipend for the deputy highway superintendent, and the confidential secretary to use highway superintendent. They kept everything within that request flat, with the exception of the, just the proposed and tentative 2% increase for employees nationwide.
That's the 80,000 for contractual street administration, what is it? 5132.
That's, so we use that a lot to pay for it's basically with the utility, pretty much just the utilities, and Jason can correct me if I'm wrong, for our garage. So telephone,
So it's
internet,
mostly okay.
water,
Mhm.
electric, heat.
And how much have we spent so far this year? Do you know that, or?
I do wish I put in the financial report.
September one, right?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, I have the August one. I must have- so I didn't need it.
Next meeting.
We can certainly look that one up. If you look at the actual for 2020,
We're down to $19,185.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And that should,
it's
it's
a
20,000 a quarter, or is that about? So you've got 1 quarter left, that's good,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
My husband says he cannot understand the word.
I don't know how to fix that. I can turn the speakers up, but you see, the microphones are already quite loud. I don't know. That's as loud as they go.
Sharon? You hear it perfectly back there through the speakers for Milton.
If you what?
I said, you can hear perfectly back there where Jason and John are.
Okay.
Because it's going through the speakers of the building. I wonder if there's some way to hook up speakers, extra speakers for them.
But, I don't know.
I wouldn't be able to do it tonight, but I'm just saying, if you went back there, you could hear it perfectly.
Yeah. I just think if Tony can't hear it, nobody else can.
Probably the microphone on the computer is too far away from us. I don't,
Oh. Hmm.
I could move it at the end of the table, but the closer we get, the less people can see. You know what I'm saying?
We have to social distance.
Right, and we're borderline with that as it is.
Right.
So, I don't even know if putting it at the end of the table will help.
Does anybody else have feedback from anybody at home or out and about who can't hear it?
Could we impose on Frank, ask him to wait if he can hear?
Well, yeah, Frank, are you able to hear us? You said he was before. Can you just wave if you can hear us, Frank? And he's saying he can. So I'm not sure what the holdup is there.
Meaningfully, I'm sorry.
It's all right, just have to muddle through here. With apologies.
Okay, the website?
Yep, so street lighting, we'll just skip over it. It's a small, amount and, it just from an accounting standpoint, you know, like just,
That swaps with the B, doesn't it? The A5182 and the B5182.
you'll see that with the,
Yeah.
right, that fix a historical accounting item, and that more or less just push it to the right place within the budget. This one was just, this was just historically to be accounted for in the wrong area, but that's okay. From a publicity standpoint, this appropriation is new, and I threw 4,000 in there as I do not know what the cost of hosting a website is. We asked for Brenda to provide us with a contract which may have that would have defined what that rate or that cost would be in the next, in the next year. So that's,
She just hasn't gotten back to us
Yeah.
yet. It's not that she's not going to.
Okay.
once
She
she
just hasn't
does,
had a chance to get back to us yet.
we'll probably decrease that line rate to whatever the cost of posting that website is. The veteran service, we make a contribution of VFW, the Legion for $500. So we're going to move that appropriation alone. With parks, again, this is another grouping that whereas we'll put our hands together and look into this a little more in depth. There's a lot of there's a lot of like good ideas for trying to give back to our the children, give back to the community, and update the parks. There's a lot of swirling of ideas for giving back to the community, and we may want to vet those before we.
Would that be the 45,000 or what?
The
piece?
40,000.
The 40,000, that's not furniture.
There actually is no furniture in this line for this group yet.
So when we go back to that furniture, the 165,000, take 40 out.
Equipment and capital, all
That's-
combined.
Yeah, they all combined to be 165, but the furniture is 100, am I right? So this is 40 of the
actually-
65.
There's across a couple funds, so it's not that, in aggregate it's 100, but
Okay.
say 70's allocated to the ag, 20 to the B, 10 to DB. It's
So what does he want for equipment in there? What's the point?
well,
They need a new machine to pick up leaves.
No, that was the $9,000 number or something, right?
Yep.
He was gonna go to Emmerich's or something.
We did recently get a quote from Emmerich's for a chainsaw and hedge trimmer. Maybe that's what we're on. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's important for us to, you know, to reach out to a local company or, you know, a vendor that can provide us with a quote for how much, you know, these capital pieces of equipment would cost.
He would like to have just a couple new pieces of equipment to help with the maintenance of the parks. And then some of that equipment too would be, is replacement of parts and pieces that are breaking down on the playground equipment.
Oh,
We've had a couple pieces that we just couldn't get replaced this year. And
does that include cameras in the parks?
The system would be a capital outlay, but like the maintenance to repair a camera system that was damaged would be contractual.
Okay. Because I think, considering the amount of vandalism this year at the parks, you know, I don't know if our insurance covers that or what, but it doesn't, you know, I'd still like to make sure that stops. I just wonder, this is not a-
When we looked at other departments, we were getting into contingencies and setting up capital reserve. Is this a type thing? Or is this a one-time shot? Or should we treat it the same as other departments? Or
The
would
way,
fund some of it, but not all of it?
I guess we would want to have like a, you know, a conversation with our building maintenance supervisor and you know, try to gauge, you know, him as departments of the buildings. I mean, if they're capable of you know, handling a parks project, then, you know, it can be something that we can utilize the operating budget to fund. If it's you know, to your point, Jim, like a piece of equipment, yeah, I mean, we can certainly, you know, put a, you know, amount in there to fund, you know, the acquisition of a piece of equipment in, you know, in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
And do the same thing we're doing with others, trying
I
to
think
spread the.
every
pain.
department should
Every department should
kind
have a
of
list.
equitable, yeah, exactly. Like what do you have currently,
What's the life expectancy,
right,
you know, depreciated, as Jason did one for the.
So this would be a tentative cut.
tentative cut.
Tentative cut. Based on taking part of that and moving it to a line in the appropriation funds. And then intertransfer, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that something we think we're going to do?
yes,
Okay. How much?
half.
Half.
Okay.
Okay, the youth program, I don't want to touch. Can we leave that?
So, Benny, just a quick question. I assume we anticipate full programs, and that's why the number is so much different from 2021?
Yes.
Total cut then is 100.
If you're running a tote board,
Nothing solid.
What's the total amount so far?
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, evidently he's doing the math.
Oh, all right, okay.
That's where we are.
All right. Okay.
Yes. The historian, I don't think we're going to touch anything with Karen there.
Karen requested 6,000 from the personnel service, you know, standpoint, but I had her increase that by 2% for all employees. That actually made me 4% for her, just because we kept her flat for some reason last year. For both. What was it? She's great. She
Yeah.
does what provides the town with a lot of service.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the most interesting parts of any board meeting is Karen. Yes.
She doesn't get any furniture.
She doesn't
No.
get any furniture.
Unfortunate.
Well, she does have an office though, I mean,
Well,
It's in a stairway.
she has a workspace, I
yeah.
wouldn't quite call it an office.
And I don't know, but I believe what our plan was to maybe relocate her
She's gonna go downstairs.
daily operating, her place of business to within the building department and I think retain the place on the stairwell.
Can I ask why she doesn't like stay at the Brookside Museum or something? Would that be something that they would want to have? I mean, she's kind of a curator, in a way, isn't she?
She is a town employee though, so I'm not sure.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
we could-
Oh, and Brookside is not.
Brookside is a county
Oh,
facility.
oh, I didn't know. But we donate to them, right? Do you know?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Is that donation in this budget?
Yeah, it's in,
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, it's in there.
Yeah.
it's in the 7510.4. I believe the amount is 3,500.
Oh,
That's usually stated in the organizational meeting.
that's one of the first resolutions, isn't it?
One of them.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Again, the community center is part of the buildings and grounds department, so that's just 1/3 of where the figures come from.
It's a big drop on the contractual part. Is that because it's been split up in all
Yes.
these buildings?
The primary reason for that reduction is the relocation back to the town hall. And fire,
Excuse me, Dave, if I may ask on the equipment and capital outlay for the community center. So my recollection is, Anthony talked about heating and air conditioning. Is that what this number represents?
I believe we've recently, we just replaced this one unit and in order to replace both of the units,
That was in last year's budget. We talked about that last year.
Yes.
we've actually got, I feel like we've got a pretty good deal on those commercial units, around 7,500. So I think we'll be somewhere in that range. That unit is much larger.
So I'm sorry, I think that we had some limited discussion about the potential use of the ARPA funds toward that. Is that something we're still looking at, or is it out of the question?
No, that's up, the board is gonna have a meeting with, we're gonna try to schedule a meeting with, there's a group that the county has, the county's accounting firm has offered 5 hours of free consultation to every town in the county. So we'll schedule something, and then we can sit down with them over a conference, and we can ask our questions and where we can use the funds. As we've all discovered, the funding is, the money's there, but where you can use it is not as broad as everyone thinks it is. So one of the places that you can use it is to improve the air quality in your building. And this would certainly, this seems to fit the bill, so.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, in the event that, that we decide that we can utilize those ARPA funds to replace one of our HVAC units at the community center, what we would actually wind up doing is, rather than reducing the appropriation, we would increase our local revenue sources. Our federal aid figure on page 8 would increase directly, in line with what our anticipated appropriation would be. So no taxpayer impact. Still.
Good.
The environmental control appropriation, 1,000 is an amount that we provided to Friends of the Caver House. Karen provided the projection for cemeteries of 3,000. I think there are some stone cemetery plots and our stones that need some some attention.
Is that the ones at Boyhaven?
That may be a couple of them.
Is that enough to cover all of that? Or is it-
I think so.
From a debt service standpoint, we will have to endure approximately $100,000 in principal. In year one, the interest is going to be very low, and then it's only going to cost $4,000. That's because we went out to issue a bond anticipation note. When we go long term in when we complete the project, then interest rate, could fluctuate upward. It's just from like an awareness standpoint, and it won't be too much worse than where it currently is.
Could you review, it's a 10-year bond, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so we would pay $100,000 plus service for 10 years and clear the bond, right?
Exactly.
And then the total service on that bond is 40-something? 4,000 some $100 or something?
That's a good way to estimate it.
Okay, so the cost is just 4,000 over 10 years. There-
No,
Oh, it's 4,000
per year.
per year.
Per year?
Per year, okay. But that's not in here.
Yeah, there's,
Yes, it is.
right there,
That's the 4,000?
yeah.
Yes,
Got
yeah,
it.
for notes and interest.
Okay. So it's gonna cost us about 104,000
Yes,
to cover that, and we'd be paid off.
for 10 years, yes.
And- Okay. Thank you.
I came on projections for, say, retirement, social security, unemployment insurance, disability insurance, and medical and dental insurance. There isn't,
There's no wiggle room in there, is there?
these are estimates that are,
Backed up by,
yeah, that are fairly solid, and the employee benefits, that's one of your, that's one of the items within a budget that you really don't want to cut.
no,
Right.
aren't they mandates?
To the other side of the house, it's often one of the items that's added the most, just to be safe rather than sorry. But these are, I feel like these are pretty good estimates. I can certainly go through the methodology. It would take some time. They're fairly complicated.
Yeah.
Well, with the exception of Social Security, that one's the point one is times 7.65, and that's our cost. And unemployment and disability, those are just almost placeholders.
When someone retires, what, if any, does the town pay of its funds to maintain the retiree? Anything?
Yeah, we've got this,
Well-
that line, right?
From the state retirement, they actually would cease to be like an obligation of ours from a state retirement standpoint. Like we wouldn't have to contribute 16% or and I say 16%. That's what a tier 6 member like myself would cost the tax base. But for somebody like a tier 4, they may be somewhat like towards the lower end of the spectrum, like maybe like 10, 11%. So the town would actually stop paying into retirement on behalf of that employee. Our employee handbook does provide for employees based on when they were hired, the ability to to stay on our insurance plan at, sometimes it's,
at whatever percentage they're paying when they retire.
But the state is paying that, not the town. Their benefits, their retirement benefits.
Oh.
Health insurance is a town benefit.
the retirement benefit that they receive directly from the state, that is, like, to your point, they're receiving a check directly from the controller's office.
State.
Yeah, to the New York State Controller.
That 102,000 comes right out of us, right?
That is us making a contribution on an annual basis for the whole workforce that
Right.
is paid through the A fund
Okay.
on an annual basis for active
So-
employees.
That funds people who are currently working,
Yes.
Right.
but when they retire, it goes, the state has all this money that we paid into that all
That's
these
right.
years.
Exactly.
Got it, okay, okay.
But the 318,000 is our town
That's
paying
us.
their health insurance?
Well, so that's active employees and retired employees. For a lot of our, we do provide, fairly, I guess, good retirement benefit package.
People who are currently retired from the town, we pay their health care costs. That was, we've been doing that for a very long time.
And their spouses also?
Yes, 100%. And their spouses also, yes.
What happens when they die?
When the employee passes away, we still pay for the surviving spouse.
Okay.
Forever?
At this time,
Until they
yes.
die.
Well, yeah,
Right, I mean, that,
at this time, yes, we do cover the surviving spouse.
Yeah, the only other thing we pay is the Medicare Part B reimbursements,
Bury when you retire.
which is another $1,200 per retiree.
Something like.
You double that if
Bury
it's
in
plus a
Mannequin.
spouse.
you pay that too?
Yep.
She hasn't renewed.
Is that part of the handbook? Pardon me? That's part of the handbook,
What's that?
the retirees, right?
Yes, but we were also told, when I first came into office, that if we continued this, we would be borrowing money to pay benefits. We were warned about that in one of the audits.
Yeah.
So that's why we've been trying to do something about this in the handbook.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the future liability is over $7 million to the town.
It might even be more at this point in time, yes.
Over
Okay.
how,
Forever,
in perpetuity?
Yes.
but that's a policy issue, right?
Right. That's a policy issue. That's something the board has to take up.
Yes.
Dave, I'm going to ask a question. Does that include the money they paid back, get paid back from their Medicare out of Social Security? Is that included in that 318? Because we pay that back, am I correct?
Yep. So on a quarterly basis, our retirees they'll pay their own Medicare Part B plan, and we reimburse at a flat rate of $170. I'm sorry, it's $114.70 per month, which equates to.
Wow. Is that included in that 318?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
And that goes on forever, there's no cutoff?
There's no,
Okay.
And then just to draw, there is intention a new item that's included in, this tentative budget is, it's an interfund transfer, where we plan to, transfer restricted resources from our general fund to the capital projects fund to pay for the cost to relocate and, replace our fuel, or dilapidated fuel island station.
And that's the 299,950?
So, yep, that's $299.50, and I think it's important to come back to page 2. And show how our general fund townwide appropriations of 2.788, they're somewhat inflated by that 299, but we need to recognize it because we plan to move resources that have been restricted within the fund to the capital projects fund. So That's where you'll see under the appropriated fund balance and reserve fund balance, the 299,950 is what we appropriate, and that funds, and that is considered local revenue in the H fund, the fuel island station replacement or relocation. So zero taxpayer impact. This is just a way to be more transparent related to your tax base, to make them aware of your plans to undergo this project, and then to show them that you actually have the resources set aside to fund the project.
Where does the building committee, where's town hall in this budget?
So that's a capital budget, so the reason, excuse me, the reason it's not depicted within this tentative budget is because the plan is for us to complete the capital project prior to the fiscal year end.
But we've only borrowed $1 million to cover that.
Yep, and then, then the board decided to utilize resources that we accumulated from prior year's operations to finance the remaining, up to the remaining costs of the project.
The fund balances.
Yeah,
Yeah. And somebody said somewhere there's no fund balances left. Is that true?
that is not true. That sounds very
I
misleading.
almost feel like I want to ask it
Unguided.
again. Just to be clear.
We are not out of fund balance, no.
We're actually fiscally healthy, and I would, I think we do. When it's all said and done, I think we have an opportunity to utilize resources that we've accumulated from prior year's operations to push the tax levy back to a point where we may even be in compliance with the levy limit. We may even drop taxes. I mean, this is a tentative budget, so everything is on the table.
And so, on your Kennedy budget, it's showing a 299,950 on the front page.
Yep.
Did not include any reserves that we could use to offset any of the total budget need.
That is the goal of developing a structurally balanced budget. You should not appropriate any. At the bottom of this column, it should be zero. The goal is for you to not have to rely on resources accumulated from prior year's operations to finance future year's operations. When we do that, and when we do that for a 16-year period of time, it indicates that our budgeting practices could be improved.
Yeah, but that would drive your tax need to totally fund the town budget in taxes,
That's good.
not thinking about reserves at all.
That's where we're at within this version. So that 299, when we make some different cuts, and we feel that we got it, maybe the increase to a point that I guess wherever it lands, we can at that point in time look to see how much we have in resources related to prior year's operations, and apply those resources against the.
Gotta get a little closer and move that in a little bit.
Okay.
People are having a hard time hearing. That's okay.
Oh, that's it, okay.
So the
Good training.
Yep, so back down, so the 36,2022 equivalent capital outlay, for safety inspection. Included within that is a significant increase year over year. We had 18 the included appropriations totaling $18,000 in the 2021 budget. Included in the 2022 tentative budget are appropriations totaling $33,000. I think the big increase there is related to a significant software update. Where our building inspector projects that we'll spend close to $15,000 to update the municipal program that they work with. That also includes the furniture and equipment for that department and 2 computers. What's about?
Let's just be 18,000 of capital reserve.
That was kind of, so we actually had a similar discussion regarding this amount where Bill thought it would be to the benefit of the town to push resources into a capital reserve for the replacement of equipment and basically vehicles. Within the emergency preparedness line, I think we've already addressed the $10,000 estimate by including a $2,500 amount to be placed into the reserve.
He's got $18,000 in there for vehicle replacement, and then another $15,000 for the municipal upgrade. That accounts for the 33.
I've got the 5 and the 15 and the 1.8. So it's only 21.8.
Sure. The 5 for training, I pushed down into the contractual
Oh, you moved that.
section. Yep.
Oh, I see.
Is his capital outlay being treated the same as everybody else? I just asked a question.
It should be.
Well, like I said, 15 of that 33 is a software upgrade. That's got to be in there.
Would that have an annual cost when you upgrade? Must be a
There's
maintenance
there's a high likelihood,
Yeah, okay.
and that cost will then be borne by the contractual.
Is adding an employee?
I mean, I tweaked one of his requests, and that was just, he thought that employee benefits would be paid for out of the personal services line, so he threw basically the split of estimated personal services for the promoting of a part-time employee in the department to a full-time basis. So that cost would have been captured in the employee benefit section of the fund. And then
Again, that's also going to be a board decision, deciding if we want to go with the full-time person split across 2 departments, or if we want to have two separate part-time people working in each department. There are still some personnel and department decisions that the board needs to make before this budget is finalized, which will obviously affect the final numbers.
Yes, there's a, within the public health section, it's really nominal. The town clerk gets a $1,000 stipend for being a registrar of vital statistics. There's a $1,500 stipend paid to a town physician. We use through Catherine Street lighting, the town pays for, and I guess the lighting has to be outside of the village because it's in the B fund.
Right.
Basically, I pushed this down from the 5110 to the 5182. There is support to for how we derived that figure.
Okay.
Yeah, the Office for the Aging, we're not gonna touch the library or BACC or any of those local facilities.
There's a BACC, park, the library, and like Hampton Health and Wellness, and then we have a contract with the county for transportation of our senior group. So those estimates are going to remain constant. Within the special rec facility, there's a slight increase proposed by the BARC group. Seems reasonable. So then in home community services, it was proposed that personal service amounts should be increased for our zoning and planning board chair and board members. By the building inspector who works closely with those board members. Again, those increased personal service costs, they will be subject to the board's review and approval. What is unique in this year's zoning planning contractual lines are a increase for legal services proposed by the current building and plan zoning and planning attorney that we work with. And then there was a proposal by our building inspector for us to work with a planning consultant to help.
They can help with part of the projects that come in, instead of sending it out to MJ at a higher rate, and the in-house planner be a part-time position. That person could do some of the stuff that MJ does at a much lower cost, get the project in and filed up and, prettied up, ready to go, for MJ to do a final inspection. So there is the potential for a major cost savings there.
Would this be, if the board decided to create a town engineer, then this town engineer would do all of these services, is that correct? Also, is the attorney saying that he wants to go from 16,000 to 33,500?
No, part of that is the planner.
I'm talking about zoning.
Yes, well, the fees for the attorney are split up between zoning and planning because he does got both boards.
There
Oh,
is
okay.
support within the package that illustrates the request of the board.
So the planner would be half of 33,500 and half of 33,500, in both boards, right? Which makes it 33.5. So we're gonna hire someone, that's a board decision, to be a planner for the zoning and the planning board for 33.5. But couldn't we hire a town engineer for 60? And then all you're doing is paying that guy and you don't have to pay MJ money, just ask the question.
Well, if we pay a town engineer $60,000, plus his healthcare, plus his retirement, all of a sudden that 60,000 is probably closer to 80,000.
Yeah, just ask the question. Because I know MJ is quite a bit, hundreds of thousands a year.
A lot of those costs are passed through. When a project comes in, the person presenting the project, they are aware that engineering fees are part of it.
I got it. Okay.
So they're paid by the developer.
Right.
You know, that, to that point, Jim, you know, the town has utilized had an in-house, engineer, so it's worth the discussion. It's a growing town, it's a big community.
Kind of difficult, isn't it, to get a part-time engineer? Or you're looking at somebody like retired or something like that, or, I'm just asking, I don't, it's not part of it.
Kind of like our zoning and planning attorney, when he works for whatever the rate is, but it's just not I guess he's contractual.
Yeah, but he works for us, he works for other towns, and he has his own practice, so if they do, they don't just wait for, the town of Milton to come up with something, they have other things they're doing. And this is also, Bill's request was for a planner, not an engineer. A planner. That could help get a lot of this paperwork, set up and ready to go so the engineer can come. Now, a planner also knows about our town codes and how things need to be met, and so that would save us some time there too.
Is that like code enforcement? Did that have something, did code enforcement go up, is there a reason for that too?
So personnel services under code enforcement increased as a result of the part-time rate increasing to what the equivalent full-time position would be in grade 1.
Okay. So that's for the board to decide, that's the.
Yes, it's another board decision.